All right, hold on. Let's see. I think we're live. It looks live, Dave. Oh my word! Happy Wednesday! Happy Wednesday, everybody! It's episode 14 of the TED Show. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties this morning on the 18th floor. Nobody can connect. We have cheerleaders to our left. I'll introduce them in a minute, but my guest today is Dave, and people are up, so we're good. My guest today is Dave Benson, a great friend and also a national security expert, workplace violence prevention expert, identifying all of that good stuff going on in the world, which is sort of what I put in the Facebook post. And the reason I wanted to have him on, I think what he does is fascinating, and I think it's very timely with what is going on in our country and around the world. One caveat to this is we're not going to get political. He's just going to give some definitions and maybe some explanations of things that I think are really important for us to know, just across the board. But yeah, we're not looking to get into politics, Republican, Democrat, all that craziness. We just want to educate. So ask questions. Charnel's currently working to figure out, and I see you guys coming on. Hello, I can't see you yet, but and so Dave's here. So Dave and I met through his beautiful wife, Dorothy Benson, who's also to his left, one of our cheerleaders, along with Jill Cohen. And we started to talk, and then one of the coolest things I found out about you was that you've got a connection to Princess Diana. And of course, my wife Stacy is a huge anything Princess Diana. She's watched every royal show known to man. But it has to do with Princess Diana being here in Orlando back in the day. So I've seen the picture. It's an awesome picture. You can Google it after the show. But tell us a little bit about that. Well, and thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And putting up with our crazy technology.
Thanks for having me. My relationship with the princess was part of my career with the Diplomatic Security Service for the U.S. Department of State. If you're not familiar with DS or the security and law enforcement, the foreign affairs community did an awful lot of executive and dignitary protection. Because I was a former Disney security representative many moons ago, the State Department, and what may have been a groundbreaking great decision, because sometimes our government is not known for great decisions, decided because I had the background it would make sense for me to come down. That was the now famous visit when the princess came down with a very small entourage to include her two sons, the princes, and a couple of her good friends, and we spent about 10 days on the Walt Disney World property. And so the picture you're referring to is a picture of all of us going down on Splash Mountain on the log flume. And it actually made it on the front page of the National Enquirer, to which the lovely Dorothy, my wife, called me up and said, "Well, you've finally done it, sweetie. You're in the tabloids."
You made it to the tabloids.
Right.
Sorry about the mic issue earlier. It must have fallen off when we were trying to figure out technology. Hopefully you can hear. I still see all your comments. So was she as graceful as she appeared? She just seemed like such a wonderful human being.
Well, if it was possible, she was more beautiful in person than she photographed, and absolutely beautiful person on the inside. One of the things that really impressed me was that what a great mother she was. And of course we can see that now because both her sons have become very viable members of the royal family while still giving back to the community, and it's a direct result, frankly, of her tremendous parenting. So that impressed me the most about her.
That's awesome. It appears that way because I think Prince William and Prince Harry definitely got that from their mom, the charitable side,
I think so.
The loving and affectionate side, because the royal family prior to Princess Diana wasn't exactly known for their warmth.
No, and her life, as tragic as it was at the end, in my opinion, transformed that into a modern royal family, and one of the reasons why they're still going strong is because they've learned to adapt. You have to be able to relate to the people that you're responsible for.
Exactly. All right, so I think we've got the sound done. So again, this is Dave Benson, just in case you missed it. National security expert, great friend here at the Citrus Club with his beautiful wife, Dorothy. Oh, good, we're up. So now you can, oh, you love my shirt. Thank you, Nirmala. I appreciate that. No jacket today, people. I'll get it ahead of it for you. It just felt like I needed to just have a shirt today.
Well, it was actually in my contract that you couldn't upstage me, so I appreciate you.
Dave's got a nice pocket square going and a jacket, and I'm feeling a little underdressed, but we'll get with it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about where do you want to start, because there's so much going on in the world, and there's so much out there in the news, and you can't really I can never figure out where I'm supposed to get my information from. So one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the show is to educate a little bit. And whatever topics you want to talk about are going to be timely, because again, like I said, there's so much going on in the world, not just worldly, but nationally, but locally. So bring it on, Dave. I want to hear some things that I think people will appreciate getting educated on. And again, if you missed it earlier, we're not going to get into politics. We're just going to educate today.
Well, thank you for that. I think first and foremost, there needs to be an acknowledgement that our world has changed in many different ways. And part of that in a positive way with technology and global reach. Some of those same tools have enabled some of the darker sides of our reality to use those and exploit it. And so if you turn on your television or your Facebook or whatever, you would be led to believe that violence internationally is running rampant, and in fact there's very little we can do about it. That's actually not true. While acts of extreme violence, active shooters, active threat type of situations have certainly increased in the last 3 or 4 years, and it is a concern to include in our own country. We've sadly experienced this twice in Orlando with the tragedy of Pulse, but also just right up the road with an organization that went through an active shooter event. The reality of it is the likelihood of us being exposed to this type of violence is about the same as being struck by lightning.
Okay, so it appears that way. Is that because, and I'm not blaming the media, I'm just asking, is that because there's such an exploitation of the information, and so you repeat it 1,000 times on 10 different media or social media sites, and so it just appears to be worse?
Well, I think part of it is that, as I said, as the acts of extreme violence are on the increase, while homicides in the United States are on the decrease. It appears to be a bit of a paradox with that, and the reality of it is that we see it more and more. We're exposed to it. In some cases, we're becoming numb to it, and we're under the mistaken belief that there's nothing we can do about that. And one of the things I've dedicated my life to is to make sure folks understand, organizations, that's not so. There are some things we can and should be doing to greatly minimize the possibility of being in that wrong place and the wrong time.
Because I think, again, back to and that's great to hear, because we hear all about everything on the news tends to be murders up, terrorism's up, and you see it, and it gets played over and over, and so you feel like, oh my God, everything's worse. I don't want to let my kids out. I don't want to travel internationally. I don't want to travel at all. I don't want to get on an airplane. And everything feels like we have to be constantly aware, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think people don't know how to be aware, and they don't know what to look for. And so those are some of the things that you train people on.
That's absolutely right. One of the things we like to talk about is we want you and your folks to be mindful, not fearful. I am not a fearmonger. I'm not a fan of fear-mongering. Anybody can frighten somebody to the point that they don't want to go outside. I advocate continuing to live your life, but in a prudent way. And one of the ways you can be mindful and not fearful is to recognize a few key things. Almost always, as a student of violence for the past 40 years or so, almost always violence is not spontaneous. So contrary to what we hear on the television or read in the media, violence is not spontaneous, so people just don't snap. So if that's true, then that means there's almost some behavior ahead of time that may be an indicator of potential violence down the road. And what we need to do is educate folks on what that looks like, who to report it to, and then how to respond, Lord forbid, if we find ourselves in the middle of a potential violent situation.
Because I think when you see the stories like the recent workplace violence tragedy over off of Forsyth Road in Orlando or Winter Park, everybody you talked to said that they felt like he might come back and do something. So people are cognizant of it, but I think they don't know how to make the leap from, okay, I'm cognizant of it, what do I do next to make sure that they don't come in, or can I do anything?
Yeah, so there's kind of two subsets of this, Ted. The first one is, what can organizations do? What should they be doing? Number one, they need to have comprehensive workplace violence prevention programs, which means training everyone in the organization, no matter how small and how large, what workplace violence is, what are some of the behaviors of concern that could be precursors to violent behavior, how do they report that information? Homeland Security talks about, if you see something, say something. Well, we need to take it to the next level and say, see what? say what.
Agreed.
We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And then what happens if, despite your best efforts, you find yourself in the wrong place in the wrong time, no matter how unlikely, and you're about to be in the middle of an extreme violent event? What are some of the response options that you can do to mitigate the threat or save your life? The final one is to recognize that the scourge of domestic violence is at epidemic proportions in our country and around the world. And if we don't recognize that and recognize that that is yet another type of workplace violence that almost always finds itself into the workplace, and when it does, it's exponentially more likely to turn violent. So those are the baseline things that people need to understand. The opportunity for organizations is to tailor that to their culture and their organization.
Sure.
What are you looking for? Behaviors of concern. We teach that. Who do you report it to? Is there a comfort level reporting it, or are you going to be ostracized or criticized because you're sharing the information? And non-retaliation when people share this information, because we're all in this together, and it really is not just an organizational issue, it's a community issue. And we're only going to begin to put a dent in it by working together as a team, and that's recognizing we have to look out for each other. Just as we're looking out for each other as you're taping this in the supreme tragedy in Texas. People step up. It's the same way to step up. If you see something that doesn't seem right to you, share that information, get it to the right people so it can be processed.
And so I guess the perception out there, I mean, it's my perception, so I'll talk about it, is that, so let's say I see something, like you were mentioning, so I see something. Do I just report it to my boss? Do I report it to the head of the place that I work or the building? What if I do go to the local law enforcement? Are they good? How seriously do they take that? And then how involved am I? Because like you said earlier, the retaliation part is kind of scary. And I think that people are afraid to get involved because they are afraid of the retaliation. So what's the best way to handle that? And if I go to the police station, am I going to have to give a ton of reports? Am I going to have to testify? Maybe those are all yeses, but how can I mitigate that for myself so it's not...
Yeah, that's a great question, and I hear it a lot, and that's why we advocate multiple avenues of reporting. Some people are not going to be comfortable going face-to-face. Others are going to put it in writing. Others may prefer to do it anonymously.
Can you do it anonymously?
Absolutely.
That's a word, anonymously.
And, as 23 and a half years as a federal agent, I will tell you, I'd rather have the information than worrying about the sourcing of the information. We can begin to process it. And so have that. The other thing that's extremely important is a culture of trust and respect. If you're working with an organization or a group of people or hang out with a group that don't respect each other and there's no integrity, you have a real challenge when it comes sharing this type of information.
I believe that.
We want potential victims, particularly victims of domestic violence, to feel comfortable enough to come forward realizing that the information they share is going to be handled with care in a productive way. So multiple avenues of reporting. And then secondly, organizations have to make responsible decisions with the information. You talked about law enforcement. Law enforcement does a tremendous job, but they are learning as they go about domestic violence. Many of them now have domestic violent units that all they do is deal with these types of issues, to know how to deal with prospective victims, prospective perpetrators, and how to process that information. So organizationally, you need to have a plan. You need to have a protocol in place on how you're going to manage this.
Thank you.
And how are you going to respond to these issues when they come up, whether it be precursor behavior or actually an event that we feel is about to take place.
So, and I'm looking at some of the comments real quick. Dennis Michael Sterling said, I met Dave almost 20 years ago when I started to DJ and MC at Walt Disney World. Always have the best guests, Ted. So he must have met you. Good to know. And then Vic Colazzo, and I'm sorry, we're a little bit delayed. We have the craziest internet connection right here. Vic Colazzo said, great topic, as he sits in the LGBT Center preparing packets for tomorrow's grand reopening. Prevention, preparation, no fear.
And absolutely, and all communities are affected, particularly by domestic violence, and we know about hate crimes and what we call targeted violence. Whether you prefer to talk about the Pulse tragedy as being a hate crime or an act of terror, I'm the professional. I'm telling you, I don't care what you call it. targeted violence is targeted violence, and you recognize it when you see it. It has some of the same behaviors ahead of time. So we need to label things less and focus more on this violent behavior. We know that people that intend on targeting other individuals to harm, that they many times go into what we call planning behavior. Well, that might seem a little spooky. The good news is planning behavior means with a little training, we can detect some behaviors. What does that mean? Change in an individual. I always say, if somebody calls me up in my consultancy, which they want to do, and say, Dave, we've got this guy that's got anger management issues, what do we do? And I say, how long has this been happening? 51 years. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's a character flaw.
Correct.
That's not a behavior
Correct.
of concern.
Correct.
So we need to be able to put this in context and be able to get it reported, and then intervention strategies have to make sense. And working it as a team, particularly within the community, is the best recipe for hopefully mitigating or avoiding these events, which can and still does happen.
So we'll talk a little bit about workplace, and then I do want to talk about the free speech conversation.
Sure.
Workplace. So it feels like the communities or the workplaces have a better appreciation of it. But what's the first step in them? Like if it's a small business, like the one that happened at Forsyth, I mean, they have 10 employees that worked in there or something like that. How do you get that to the business owner and make them understand that this could be an issue for you? So let's train your employees and let's get everybody acclimated so that they can recognize the signs, and then what to do with it afterwards.
So great point. So awareness is your key. And so you can have locks and whistles and alarms and retina scams and armed security, and you still may have violent events. But if you have a trained workforce that understands what the nature of the problem is and is empowered to make some decisions on their own half for their own safety and security, that's where prevention starts and people become empowered. I'd rather have everybody in an organization trained on some of the topics we just talked about, Ted, than to have you locked up like a fortress, because what happens is that's a false sense of security. Because one of the things I know as a threat assessment professional, threats come from all sources: outside, inside, former current family members, retirees. Nothing is exempt from this type of violent behavior, and so we need to recognize that and come up with strategies to deal with it. So when we say, if you see something, behavior of concerns, what constitute a change in an individual or persons that you've seen before that don't make you comfortable. Number two, report them to law enforcement within the organization, report it hopefully through established channels that you have.
And we'll get into the free speech next, but it's interesting. So growing up Italian New York, it's hard for me to have my back to the club. Like right now we have our backs.
I'm very uncomfortable.
I was going to say, so he's probably uncomfortable too, because we actually have our backs to the entire room, and the only thing we can see sort of is the reflection in the camera. But that's a real thing. Like people do. There is a reality to that, I guess is what I'm saying.
There is, and what I've tried to do, and some of my colleagues at the Center for Personal Protection and Safety, is transfer kind of that more police and military behavior to the public at large. So what we're talking about is a survival mindset. What does that mean? It means you're aware of your surroundings. First and foremost, all you have to do is drive to work or drive from work and look to your left or right, and you're dealing with people that are clueless. And we know that. Sometimes that's us with our nose in the phone or whatever. We need to be aware of where we are, and then where's potential danger. Not in a paranoid way, but the reason we look for the front door is I want to know where an exit is. I want to see a threat if it's coming to me and what I'm going to do about it. And then where is a safe retreat potentially? When you're driving on the road, it can be going straight to a police department or going to a very public place if you think you're being followed. So I train different categories of people, from children to teens to women to elders. They have unique challenges, all of them, but it all centers on being aware of what's coming at you and having a plan of what you might do, play the what-if game.
And I think that's good. The awareness is really what is so critical, because honestly, if you are not aware of your surroundings, or another thing that came up last night, I was at an event, and because we're doing this show and I'm on social media a lot, I probably had 5 to 10 people come up to me at the event that I never met before that had watched the show. So the other thing that people do, talking about the planning and executing, it's not just a normal, it's not just a reactionary thing, there's some planning involved. People are really paying attention to your social media, And they may not like something or they may not comment on it, but people are watching you. And that's not to scare you, but that's just another thing that I think people need to be aware of when they put their business out there.
Yeah, it is, and that's a beautiful segue. And what else we want to talk here is about this idea of free speech versus hate speech. But before we get there, I deal with real-time threats with my clients. And so one of the reasons I've got the nice bags under my eyes is because 24/7 I'll get a call,
great.
and Dorothy can attest to that. And so it's what I call people behaving badly, all right? And they want me to help them understand when is making a threat different than posing a threat and assessing the likelihood of violence. And while we don't have time to go down that road today, just understand that of all my calls and engagements I get through my consultancy in the past couple of years, I'd say 70% plus come from social media. People don't call you anymore and say they hate you. They don't write it on the bathroom wall. They write it on the wall of their Facebook page on social media. That's number one. So organizationally, organizations need to pay attention to what is being said about them, good, bad, and indifferent. Number two, we need to be very careful. Social media is a great tool, but it can be abused. And when I teach a social media security class, one of the things I say is we don't need to know when you're going on vacation, what airline, what cab you're taking, and how long it's going to be before you come back. Because we're actually telling would-be thieves, you're going to be gone for 10 days or 2 weeks. And
Absolutely.
You know it. So be a little more prudent with that. Another one, and I can't get off this soapbox, be careful about photographing your children online. Of course we want to do that. We share it with the grandparents, we share it with family and friends. Particularly younger children, don't overexpose faces and talking about where they go to school and what their schedules are like. Just be a little more prudent in that regard. And as I've talked to some other people that are in the media eye all the time, you have to be a little careful about that because there's people out there that are looking for a reason to try to target you. Stalking, I do a lot of work with stalking, cyber stalking. You know, the big difference between conventional stalking as potentially dangerous as that is, you go cyber and you can have 500 or 1,000 people bully and stalk you together.
Yes.
And so we need to be more conscious about that. It ties into, if I might, Ted, what we say to each other and what we don't say to each other. So one of the things it seems much easier to do online, and I'm online just like everybody else, is to use emotionally charged words. You're an idiot. You're a moron. And we get worse with that. And you don't know who you're dealing with on the other end. Do they have a diminished capacity to cope? Are they angry about other things and you've just given them a reason? And so let's talk about speech in general. In general, we're blessed to be part of a country that speech is protected.
Amen.
Unfortunately, most of us think that that's always the case, and it's not so. So there's a difference between general speech and protected, which is protected, and what I call hate speech. And so there's a few exceptions that you need to know. This is not a class, there won't be a quiz, but I think your viewers might find it interesting. True threats. We'll talk about each one of these separately. Fighting words, something that might incite a fight or incitement of imminent lawless action. Just like you can't stand up in a movie theater and yell fire and expect to get away with it,
Correct.
You can't say some of these incendiary, inappropriate, awful things and expect there not to be consequences.
Right.
So, how do you know the difference? True threats is when you realize that the information is likely to be received and feared upon by the recipient, or they may take precautions based upon that language that could cause them to harm themselves or harm others. Inciting people to riot, inciting people to, and we see this a lot sometimes in demonstration activity, fighting words, getting the crowd fired up, and the next thing you know, people are harming each other, sometimes seriously, and then incitement of a lawless action. So what someone and I look like, and people like the FBI at the behavioral unit, they look at three things. They look at what's the context of the speech. Okay? What context is it in? Is there a specified target? If so, that heightens the likelihood that we have hate speech. And what is the intention of the person making the speech? And so just in general, I want your viewers to know, be careful what you say. Number one, you may incite someone to do things. We saw this with the young woman whose boyfriend committed suicide. The allegation was that she incited him
Correct.
to go ahead and do that. We'll see how that shakes out. And then the final piece is, do students on a college campus have a different right to free speech than we do? You might be surprised. The answer is yes.
They do?
So in an educational context, if it's in that enclosed environment, unless that behavior is going to material disrupt or invade the rights of others, that may be permitted where you may not be permitted to do this online and other things. So I just wanted to make everybody understand, be careful with your words. Words matter. And when you make statements, and particularly hateful statements online, there are other folks watching it, get you into a world of trouble.
Well, and I think, we have gone 25 minutes, or 28 minutes now, but I think one thing that we talked about a little bit, which it's I don't know, not a pet peeve of mine, but it's something I'd like to discuss. If you say something and it's protected under free speech, that doesn't protect you from the consequences of saying that. There are consequences to everything. So yes, you have a free speech right, but the person who might be reacting to that also has the same free speech right and has the ability to react as long as it doesn't get into the hate speech. And I think people forget that. They think that they are able to just say what they want and everybody should listen, and then there's no repercussions.
And there's no political affiliation protection on hate versus free speech, and we all need to understand that. Okay, civility is one of the hallmarks of this country. Also, free speech is one of the hallmarks of this country.
Great.
But deliberately hateful, fearful, mongering speech, many cases could be considered hate speech, and there could be pretty significant consequences.
I think we're much more cognizant of that, and I think we're seeing a lot more of it because social media gives us this instant access and instant vehicle to express anything we want, and we think that just because we put it on social media and put it out there that it's not insightful or that it's not hateful, and I think that's completely contrary to what we're...
And I want folks to understand that kind of language and behavior online is being paid attention to by folks like me and the threat assessment, threat management community, and we just need to avoid that type of behavior in general.
All right, so how do people reach you, Dave?
They can reach me via my email, which is Dave, D-A-V-E, at securingsouls, one word, .com, Dave at securingsouls.com. My website, www.securingsouls.com. And I also, via my phone, which is 407-361-2821.
I mean, I really appreciate it. First of all, thank you guys for putting up with the sound and computer issues I had today. Charnel's been awesome, of course, to the right here, helping me, as always. Dave, you were a great guest. I could talk about this all day long.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Pleasure, my friend.
Soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. We'll see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock. My guest is Nate Carrick, and I'll put more about it on social media for him. Thank you.